In the 90s, word spread around about these crazy matches that happened in Japan featuring Cactus Jack and Terry Funk. The two were far from unknown when these matches took place, and hardcore wrestling was nothing new either when the two battled in IWA Japan. But for fans outside of Japan and the US, finding these matches was a pretty hard task if you weren't into tape trading. When you're a young fan in a WWF and WCW rut in 1995, the thought of a death match sounded almost illegal. You might see pictures of the matches in magazines, you might have a friend who said they watched the matches only to find out they were lying. But when you're young and you hear about these types of matches, it becomes a mission to see these forbidden fights and violent showdowns. Hardcore ECW fans might hear this kind of thing and laugh, other older fans might find it hard to believe too. But in the UK in 1995, with no internet, WWF airing on premium Sky channels, and even WCW shows being phased out on regular TV, seeing anything remotely hardcore was absolutely mind-blowing, and these types of ultra-violent pro wrestling matches had the potential to change how a young viewer looks at pro wrestling forever. To this day, hardcore wrestling still has a big following, with the most die-hard fans completely dismissing the larger American companies in favour of organisations who specialise in violence. And many of these fans were first exposed to hardcore wrestling back in 1995 when Terry Funk and Cactus Jack had their infamous death match in Kawasaki Stadium. That King of the Deathmatch tournament in Kawasaki was shared around quite a lot within the tape trading community in the mid-90s, and that final match was my first experience watching real hardcore wrestling, and so today I want to go back and check it out again. The Kawasaki match in IWA Japan wasn't the only time Terry and Cactus met in singles competition though. There's 3 other matches that happened around the same time period that also deserves another watch, so let's check out the Kings of Hardcore in today's video. One more thing, apologies for my voice. I have a real bad throat and my throat is actually beginning to close over, but I wanted to get this video done before my voice completely goes. So I appreciate you still sticking around for this one, even with the awful audio. Before going any further, I'll point out that before their first singles match, Funk and Cactus teamed up for the Tom Robinson benefit show back in November 1990, and they also faced each other in a tag team match, Dory and Terry Funk versus Cactus Jack and Texas Terminator Hoss, maybe better known as Crusher Kong, but what a name, Texas Terminator Hoss. Terry Funk said his transition into hardcore wrestling was done to provide money for his family, and he also said that on a wider scale, Japan's movement towards more hardcore matches within some promotions was because of a lack of television exposure. Terry said, "The hardcore style began over in Japan when I was over there with Anita and those guys. You see, when my brother and I first started wrestling for All Japan in the early 70s, you didn't have cage matches or chain matches or barbed wire matches like they did in North America. It was strictly wrestling. The cage matches and stuff came later, when we had to acquire the attention of the wrestling fans and the media itself because we had no television. All our coverage was through the newspapers. We depended completely on the newspapers to get a name for ourselves in the war between Baba's All Japan Wrestling and Inoki's New Japan Pro Wrestling. And it wasn't just a war between the promoters, it was a war between the boys to see who could come out on top in the end." The first match between the two didn't happen in Japan, it happened at ECW Hardcore Heaven in 1994. Funk was definitely way more experienced than Jack when it came to ultra-violent matches, but Cactus, just like Terry, had shown some pretty violent tendencies. He had a ridiculously high pain threshold, or at least he made it look like he did, and his devil-may-care attitude towards his own well-being made him a pretty ideal candidate for death matches in Japan. In ECW, we got a taste of what was to come. Terry and Cactus went over just 11 minutes in the ECW arena in Philadelphia, and they, along with the fans, created an ECW moment that would live on forever towards the end of the match. Before the match begins, Cactus tells Terry that there's been too much violence tonight and the people inside the ECW arena want to see a scientific contest. Jack was obviously healing it up here a little, and there was no way this was going to be a technical or scientific matchup. Cactus chops Funk at the opening bell, and Funk tells Jack that's strike one. If he chops him again, then all bets are off. Jack brings Funk to the other side of the ring for another chop, and so Funk beats the hell out of Mick before throwing him out of the ring. On the outside, Mick gets hit with a piece of wood before Funk sends Cactus into the crowd, and then we don't really get a good view of what happens next. Hardcore Heaven 94 is filmed exclusively from a hard camera. There are no other camera cuts and no one at ringside to get close-ups of the action, but this kind of production does go hand in hand with these early ECW shows. Terry hits Cactus with a chair a few times, and Cactus returns the favour just before both men get back in the ring. Cactus then performs his famous neck between the ropes spot, and Terry punches Jack hard in the face while Foley can't defend himself. Foley gets released, there's more brawling around the ring, including Mick taking 2 ring post bumps, and when the two get back in the ring, the Public Enemy show up and all physicality between Funk and Cactus comes to an end. Flyboy Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge had issues with Funk stemming from Heatwave a month prior, but the Public Enemy also attack Mick Foley here before leaving the arena. Funk and Cactus decide to join forces, they break a table and they go looking for Grunge and Rock backstage. Public Enemy get brought back out to the ring where Funk and Cactus give them another beating, and when our heroes ask for someone in the audience to throw in a steel chair, well, the whole audience start launching chairs into the ring. The ring quickly fills up with steel chairs as the Public Enemy gets buried, and the tape ends with Rock and Grunge going nuts after emerging from the rubble. This Funk vs Cactus match wasn't great, but the ending lives on as a great moment in ECW history. We move forward to IWA Japan, the 8th of January 1995. Cactus Jack and Terry Funk fight at New Year 95 Bound to Break, also known as Battle of the Duels. Many hardcore fans rate this match higher than their famous King of the Deathmatch final, and this isn't because it's just cooler to say you like something that's less popular. This one is pretty violent and it's not for the squeamish. On this same tour, Cactus and Funk fought each other in 2 tag team matches, but we'll just be focusing on their single matches in this video. Before this no rope barbed wire death match, Mick says there's only 2 legends in the history of wrestling, the man on his shirt, Bruiser Brody, and his opponent tonight, Terry Funk. When Cactus needed guidance, he would call Terry Funk, but when Cactus needs to take his place in wrestling history, he shows up to IWA Japan and he doesn't ask Terry for anything, he takes everything for himself. Terry isn't his friend, this 2x4 wrapped in barbed wire is though. Cactus may be afraid tonight, but there's nothing Funk can take from him. He's already lost his teeth, he's lost his ear, and Terry Funk can't take Mick's heart because it's too big for Funk to carry. Funk says he's up against a tough opponent tonight. Cactus Jack doesn't feel pain, and that's obviously a big problem, but Terry's gonna do all he can to win tonight, and he wants the fans to say a prayer for him. It starts with Funk throwing a chair at Cactus, and Mick takes a few shots on the outside. In the ring, Funk stops short when he gets Irish whipped into the barbed wire, and it's Cactus who ends up feeling the barbed wire first. Terry's smart enough to slide under the ring when he gets Irish whipped again, but on the outside, it's Cactus Jack who gains the upper hand. Cactus hits Funk a few times with a chair before pushing the barbed wire into Terry's head, but back in the ring, Funk gets an opportunity to try his spinning toe hold. Cactus gets free by wrapping his hand in barbed wire, and Funk takes a few shots to the head, and then it's over to the barbed wire where Funk gets ripped open pretty badly. Cactus goes to the outside while Terry gets tangled up. He's hanging from the wire when Foley shows up with a flaming steel chair. Foley used the flaming steel chair days earlier in a tag team match. Mick's not too happy when the fire goes out just before he strikes Funk, so he lays in a few punches before setting the chair on fire again. Funk takes another strike, but then Terry's able to hip toss Mick right on top of the flaming chair. It's pretty wild. Funk wants to bring the chair into the ring, but the plan backfires. Mick hits him across the back, and one of the crew members decides that it's time to put the fire out. Another crazy spot happens next when Terry delivers a front suplex and Mick's whole midsection gets torn up. The barbed wire snaps right off the ring post. The small crowd gasp and cheer. Mick screams in pain. He swears quite a lot here, by the way. But then things get even worse when Mick tries his neck choke on the rope spot, replacing the ropes with barbed wire, obviously. This doesn't work out at all, and Mick wrote in his book that his hands got the worst of it. The barbs get lodged in his pinky fingers, and he had no choice but to rip the wire out and expose big chunks of flesh. Funk then throws Cactus into a table, and Mick leaves a bloody handprint on the wood. Mick's now in trouble as he crawls on the floor looking for someone to help him, but then Terry returns with a branding iron and Mick gets branded on the front and on the back. What more could these two possibly do to each other? Terry tries to brand Foley's face, but Mick fights Terry off and he puts Terry on the floor after a backbreaker. Mick then grabs onto the barbed wire just so he can pull himself up onto the apron, and then we see his classic elbow drop. The bloody Cactus Jack shouts bang bang before launching Funk into the chairs sitting at ringside. The two brawl for a bit here and a chair ends up wrapped around Terry's neck. Cactus chokes Funk out before the two get back in the ring, and then we go to the finish. Funk continues to get choked as Cactus screams with delight. The Funker then gets hit with a DDT, but he kicks out of the follow-up cover. Mick also tries a suplex, but somehow Terry Funk's still in it, and even better, he lands a few punches when he stands up again. Unfortunately, Terry doesn't stand up for too long and he falls back down due to how tired he is, but he manages to win the match after performing a counter DDT. It's a vicious match, it's hard to watch, but it's gripping from start to end. Funk's still full of adrenaline, so he attacks the poor referee after the bout, and then we get some drama when both men leave the ring. Terry screams Cactus's name and the two meet each other again while crawling on the floor. Terry wants to shake Jack's hand. Cactus, however, decides this is the perfect chance to cheap shot Terry. Cactus Jack's post-match promo is one of his best ever, but it's one that's rarely seen due to the excessive amount of blood on display. Basically, Foley says that Terry can beat Cactus Jack, but he'll never stop Cactus Jack. It's absolutely insane that Mick only got paid $300 for this match, but he explained his reasoning for going through with it in his book. Foley knew that the videotape of this match would become highly sought after among wrestling fans, and he knew that hundreds of thousands of people would end up seeing it even if hardly no people were in the audience that night. It's not for the faint-hearted, and I can see why others wouldn't like it, but for fans of hardcore wrestling and fans of Cactus or Terry, this one needs to be watched. Match number 3 takes us back to ECW, the 1995 Hostile City Showdown on April 15th. I think this one was better than their first ECW encounter at Hardcore Heaven, but it doesn't quite live up to the matches in IWA Japan. Still though, it is worth a watch. After both men make their entrances, Funk says he wants to skip the introductions and get straight to the fighting. Cactus says he has a problem with starting the match in the ring and he'd rather do it in the audience. So Terry goes after Cactus, but he goes in the complete wrong direction, giving Foley a chance to attack from behind, and the two then begin the match. Foley gets his head smacked into the wall a few times and Funk throws a few chairs at Mick from the upper level. Foley's able to set Funk on a table, but Terry moves out of the way when Jack tries an elbow drop. Terry stays in control as the two make their way down to ringside. Cactus takes more chair shots, but he's able to fight Terry off by using a baking tray and a frying pan that a generous fan handed him in the audience. Funk hip tosses Cactus into the guardrail and he proceeds to smack Jack over and over again with a steel chair. And when the match finally gets in the ring, Terry wants to bring a table in too. It's Funk who ends up getting thrown into the table, not once but twice. Funk does use the table to stop Mick from going to the top rope, however Cactus comes back with a baseball slide. On the outside, Jack uses a toilet seat to choke his opponent and Cactus rams Funk's head into a chair while jumping from the apron. Terry replies by slamming Cactus to the concrete floor. The two end up fighting all the way up to the entranceway and Terry decides to head back to the ring while Foley grabs a plastic bin that's filled with garbage. Funk ends up getting whacked across the head, but the ever-resourceful Terry Funk finds a glass bottle within the garbage and Foley takes 3 hits on the head before the bottle smashes. You can hear the glass smack Foley's skull before breaking. In probably the most gruesome part of the match, Terry breaks another bottle and he rakes it down Foley's arm. It's pretty brutal. Funk also goes for Mick's head and his chest, and before things can get any worse, Mikey Whipwreck and Hack Myers interfere and they go after the Funker. Terry takes care of Hack and Mikey before refocusing on Cactus. Funk hits Mick with a few chair shots to the leg before applying the spinning toe hold. Cactus counters with a roll-up followed by a DDT on a steel chair, but then the Sandman interferes and he accidentally hits Terry Funk when Mick was going for a cover. Foley takes care of Sandman, Terry takes another DDT, and Mick Foley wins the match via pinfall. Before the show ends, Sandman attacks Mick with a Singapore cane while Terry goes to the back to retrieve a flaming branding iron. The crowd gasps as Terry spits flames all over Mick Foley's face, and Funk then begins poking Cactus with the iron as Joey Styles says on commentary that Terry Funk has crossed the line. On the outside, Terry continues to hit Mick with his branding iron, but Mick's eventually able to take it away. The crowd chant ECW as Foley gets attended to with wet towels, and the tape ends with Joey saying, "Oh my god." You'd think it couldn't get any more crazy after the matches we've just watched, but we still have one more important match to look at. Finally, we have the big one, the most famous and well-known fight between Cactus Jack and Terry Funk. August 20th, 1995, the King of the Deathmatch final at IWA Japan Kawasaki Dream. In front of around 29,000 fans in the Kawasaki Stadium, Cactus Jack and Terry Funk would enter the King of the Deathmatch tournament that also included guys like Terry Gordy, Tiger Jeet Singh, Leatherface and others. Each round had a different match stipulation, but they were all absolutely brutal. The final match would be a barbed wire rope, exploding barbed wire boards, an exploding ring time bomb death match. And if you think that's excessive, do remember that barbed wire, glass, chains and thumbtacks were all used in the quarter and semi-finals. 3 rings were set up so some matches could happen simultaneously. Dan Severn was also in attendance to defend the NWA Heavyweight Championship against Tarzan Goto, and what you end up with here is a very unique show that's actually pretty enjoyable as long as you aren't strictly against hardcore and extreme wrestling. In the quarterfinals, Terry Funk defeated Leatherface in a barbed wire board and chain match, while Cactus Jack defeated Terry Gordy in a barbed wire baseball bat and thumbtacks match. Both of these matches would have been more than enough to satisfy your hardcore itch, but the men went on to the semi-finals where Terry defeated Tiger Jeet Singh in a barbed wire board and glass match, while Cactus Jack defeated Soji Nakamaki in a barbed wire board and spiked nail match. Yeah, that one really needs to be seen to be believed. And then we had that pretty excessive final match that included real C4 explosives. Mick wrote in his book that he was scared of the C4 and he couldn't believe it when Terry requested more explosives for the barbed wire boards. The Funker tried his best to calm Mick down by reassuring him that it would be okay, but Mick said that he wasn't okay after this bout. He wasn't okay at all. The two get in the ring and Funk throws some right hands. Just like the previous match, Cactus tries to whip Terry into the barbed wire, but the Funker stops short. Terry's not going to get ripped apart so early. Cactus takes a neckbreaker and he slides out of the ring after an Irish whip, but this gives Funk a chance to bring a barbed wire board into the middle of the ring. Remember, C4 explosives. Before the board gets used, Terry gets his head stuck in the barbed wire ropes and Mick takes a seat on the barbed wire too. The men then fight in the middle of the ring and it's Terry Funk who ends up falling on the board first. Mick wrote in his book that right here he immediately knew that the extra C4 was a bad idea, and he also knew that it was his turn next. Cactus misses an elbow drop and he gets some barbs stuck in his forearm. The Funker then pulls off a double underhook suplex because, you know, this is a wrestling match. Mick then gets whipped into the barbed wire before Terry sets up another board in the middle of the ring, and Cactus takes a hip toss onto the explosives. Foley said he didn't feel a thing here. He rolled off the board just in time and he escaped the very scary bump without injury. A relief for sure, but the match was still far from over. Funk performs 2 pile drivers, one on the canvas and another through a barbed wire board that was placed upside down. Mick then gets thrown into a front facing board that Terry set up in the corner, and the two have a brief brawl on the outside where Terry gets hit with a spool of barbed wire and Cactus gets thrown over the guardrail. Back in the ring, Terry applies the spinning toe hold and Cactus screams in agony. All Terry has to do is keep Foley down long enough for the timed explosive to go off in the ring, but Tiger Jeet Singh runs down and he begins attacking Funk. Cactus and Tiger work together to send Funk into another board, one that hadn't exploded yet, and Mick then tries to end it with a swinging neckbreaker, but Funk kicks out at 2. Mick pulls off his signature double arm DDT, Funk kicks out again. The ring announcer begins counting down from 10 because the ring's about to explode, so Terry takes another double arm DDT and Mick quickly gets out of the ring. The explosion isn't good. It's a few fireworks going off and Terry Funk rightfully no-sells it. The crowd can be heard laughing and booing too, and this moment right here is usually the only thing that gets criticised in regards to the whole match. Though imagine throwing criticism around when two guys are practically killing each other in the ring for the enjoyment of others. Mick gets in the ring and he takes his second C4 bump, and Foley says that this one got him good. Mick said he felt like he'd been shot and he got back up and he crawled around because he was so scared. A moment of panic for Cactus Jack. Terry caught the explosion under his right triceps and he too was in considerable pain, so this spot was definitely the worst of the whole match in regards to explosives. Mick then brings a ladder into the ring and Funk takes a shot right to the head. Foley then climbs up the ladder with his face completely covered in blood to deliver an elbow drop, but his second attempt at the same move goes very wrong when Terry pushes the ladder and Mick falls on the barbed wire ropes. If Terry could have just covered Foley here, the Funker would have been king of the deathmatch, but Funk spent his last bit of energy pushing that ladder. Cactus crawls over to Funk, he puts an arm over, and Cactus Jack beats Terry Funk via pinfall. There's a video of this match on YouTube right now that features audio from Mick's audiobook. I highly recommend that you check it out if you want to learn more about what Cactus was thinking as the match progressed. His book also goes into detail about how he tried to hide his injuries from his dad and his wife when he got home, and again, I recommend you check that out too if you want to learn more about the King of the Deathmatch tournament. This is the match that solidified Mick Foley as the hardcore legend, but you gotta give equal credit to Terry Funk. This is one of the most grueling, intense and scary matches you'll ever see. And now you know how Terry Funk and Mick Foley became legends of hardcore wrestling. Again, thanks for bearing with me in this one and putting up with my bad throat. It actually feels like it's about to close over right now. Do remember though that these two had other extreme matches and most were contested in tag team bouts, but their most famous singles matches were covered in today's upload. Which one was your favourite? Did you get a chance to see these tapes back in the mid-90s? What's your general thoughts about hardcore wrestling and the more extreme side of the business? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to see more Mick Foley and Terry Funk, I've covered their tag team run in WWF on Reliving the War, so check the series out for more, admittedly watered down action. Thanks for watching guys, and take care.
Bang, bang. He's not on a team or a member of a gang. He's Cactus Jack, oh, better known. Bang, bang.